The moment I heard the front door of my ranch house splinter and crash open, I knew something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my shotgun from behind the door, only to be met with a mob of HOA board members storming into my living room like a SWAT team. Leading them was Brian Adams, the self-proclaimed HOA president, waving a bright red piece of paper in his hand and barking orders like a war general. By order of the Green Hollow Ranch HOA, Brian shouted, "All privately owned firearms are now banned. This is a mandatory gun seizure for the safety of the community." I stood frozen in disbelief. Was this a nightmare? My ranch was a private 30-acre property passed down from my grandfather. I wasn't even part of the HOA, or so I thought. Before I could even argue, two board members ripped the shotgun from my hands. Another pushed past me into the hallway where my gun cabinet stood proudly, the keys still hanging from the lock. I lunged forward, shouting, "You can't do this. This is theft. This is illegal." Brian smirked. "Inside the HOA, your so-called Second Amendment rights don't mean squat. Read the new bylaw we voted. You lost. They raided my home like I was some kind of criminal. They cleaned out my entire gun cabinet. My late father's deer rifle, my collection of vintage handguns, even the old Civil War replica musket that had never fired a bullet. Everything was thrown into the back of a battered HOA maintenance van parked outside. Neighbors stood by on the gravel driveway, watching. Some looked horrified. Others shook their heads indifferently. And me? I stood there in a cloud of dust as the van drove away with everything I owned to protect my home. Brian grinned as he left. "Better get used to it. You're living under my rules now." But this was just the beginning. It had started about 6 months earlier when I inherited the ranch from my late grandfather, Samuel Carter. Grandpa Sam had bought the land in the 1950s when it was nothing but open fields. Over the decades, suburban sprawl had crept closer until a shiny new subdivision, Green Hollow Ranch Estates, sprang up less than half a mile down the road. At first, I ignored them. My land was fenced, my well private, my driveway long and winding. But one afternoon, a gold-embossed letter arrived claiming that under a recently expanded community covenant, my ranch was now officially part of the HOA. They based it on a vague community cooperation agreement Grandpa Sam had signed decades ago, combined with county rezoning. I crumpled the letter and tossed it away. Ignoring them didn't make them go away, though. They fined me for unauthorized livestock, my cattle, for unsightly landscaping, my fields, and even for dangerous wildlife, deer in my back pasture. At first, I laughed it off. Then it escalated. Carl Simons, the scrawny compliance officer, started snooping around. I caught him photographing my barn and ran him off my land. Weekly fake violation notices flooded my mailbox. And then Brian Adams became HOA president. Brian, a retired lawyer with a thirst for power, pushed through a bylaw banning all firearms within HOA territory, even on private land. Then came the raid. That evening, sitting on my porch, the setting sun painting the hills in gold, I made a vow. I would fight back. Not with fists or guns, but with brains and allies. But before I could plan, trouble came knocking again. Carl showed up with 2 hired security guards, HOA thugs, and slapped a notice of eviction on my door. "You have 72 hours to vacate," he said, voice shaking. Eviction? On my own ranch? I stared as they hammered the notice into my wall and drove off. I wasn't giving up. I jumped into my truck and sped to town, skidding into the county clerk's office just before closing. Doris, the clerk who'd known my family for years, tapped away on her computer. Her face paled. "They filed a lien 2 weeks ago," she said, "claiming you owe over $30,000 in fines. They're using it to justify eviction." I demanded to see the filings. Sure enough, they based it all on that decades-old non-binding agreement, and my land wasn't even within the original HOA boundary. "It's bogus," Doris whispered. "But you'll need a lawyer. Fast." The next morning, I met with Owen McCarthy, a tough-as-nails property lawyer who had been Grandpa Sam's friend. After hearing my story, Owen growled, "They can't do this. Not legally. We'll file an emergency injunction." But Brian wasn't done. When I got back to the ranch, he was there, grinning, padlocking my barn doors shut. He waved a fake property forfeiture notice and laughed. His thugs glared at me, hands on tasers. I didn't react. I remembered Owen's advice: stay calm, gather evidence. That night, I called neighbors, knocking on doors, explaining the truth. Some slammed their doors. Others listened. A few agreed to help. Owen worked through the night filing paperwork. By morning, the court issued a temporary restraining order against the HOA. They couldn't fine me, evict me, or seize anything until a hearing. The HOA retaliated, slapping another fake $5,000 fine for unauthorized assembly when I held a neighborhood meeting. I laughed it off. They were desperate. Then Brian played dirty. He showed up at my ranch with a federal ATF agent claiming a firearms violation to justify inspection. I demanded a warrant. They left furious. Things boiled over when Mrs. Holloway, an elderly neighbor, warned me of an emergency HOA meeting to vote on seizing my property permanently. I rushed to the community center, storming into a packed room where Brian was grandstanding about safety threats. "You're lying," I shouted. Deputy Lauren Marks burst through the doors, waving a court order. "Cease this meeting immediately," she barked. The room exploded in chaos. Brian's face drained of color. Later that night, 2 black SUVs crept up my driveway. I grabbed my bullwhip Grandpa Sam's old tool and confronted a group of masked HOA thugs trying to break into my barn. Among them was Brian himself. "Scatter!" Brian screamed as flashing lights appeared on the horizon. Deputies roared into the driveway. Brian made a run for it, but I knew my land better. I intercepted him by the old cattle gate. As he lunged at me, I sidestepped and tripped him. Deputy Marks cuffed him. Brian Adams was under arrest. Court day came. Owen laid out everything: the illegal gun raid, the fake fines, the fraud. Judge Westover didn't hesitate. She voided the HOA's claims against me, referred Brian for criminal prosecution, and ordered all my stolen property returned. Outside, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Carter, how do you feel about the verdict?" one asked. I smiled grimly. "I'm going home." And I did. But something had changed inside me. I realized it wasn't enough to save my ranch. I had to save the community, too. With Owen's encouragement, I ran for HOA president. I campaigned neighbor to neighbor. I listened. People told horror stories about Brian's reign: fines for garden gnomes, birthday parties, American flags. Election day came. I won in a landslide. My first acts? Banning weapons seizures. Requiring full board votes for any fine. Reinstating homeowner appeals. Auditing HOA finances. Rick's abuses were exposed. Criminal charges stuck. The ranchers, veterans, and families of Green Hollow Ranch finally breathed free again. That evening, sitting on the porch with the fields bathed in golden light, Mrs. Holloway brought over a fresh pie. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said. I sat back in Grandpa Sam's rocking chair, listening to the wind whisper through the hills. The ranch was safe. The people were safe. The fight had been worth it. Because some things in life aren't just worth fighting for. They're worth winning.